Hi, everyone, and welcome to Get Hired Live. I'm your host, Andrew Seaman, the LinkedIn Senior News Editor for Job Searches and Careers. As always, I want to welcome you to our show. We'll be talking about a lot today and hoping to help you with your job search and level up in your career. So first, I want you to introduce yourself into the comments. I see a lot of people doing that already. I see Ageta from Poland, Iswara from India, Vera from Brazil, Kwame from Alabama, and a lot of people are actually introducing themselves now. So we have Jesus from Texas, and we have Peter in the comments. We have Richard from Long Island. So keep introducing yourself, and then also tell us a little bit about your job search. Everyone's job search is different, and we want to hear what's going on with you. Maybe you are looking to move into a new sector. Maybe you're looking to move into a new field or even a new industry. And tell us a little bit about what's happening. And maybe then when you're looking into the comments, connect with people who are going through similar situations or could maybe help you with your job search, or maybe you can help them with their job search. Some of the best notes I get after these shows are from people who ended up connecting in the comments and ended up job searching together. And actually, job searching as a group has been shown to increase or decrease the time people spend looking for work and actually getting a job. And so, like anything else, it's things are always done with friends is better, and networking is so important to a successful job search. So what better time to start than right now? And, we have so many people, again, jumping into the comments. So please just keep introducing yourself. And then once you're done with that, get us your job search questions, and we'll be taking them in just a bit. And we have such a wonderful guest with us today. She is a career success coach, and she is also one of the top voices in job searches and careers in the latest class of top voices from LinkedIn. So welcome, Jen.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure to connect with you, Andrew.
Yeah, and thanks for joining me again. Last time you were on, I unfortunately was having internet troubles, so I appreciate your patience in joining us again.
We made it work, though, didn't we? We made it work.
Yeah, we did. So Jen Tardy, you are obviously sort of a phenom on LinkedIn. You're sharing your wisdom all the time. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about a new piece of advice that you're putting out, and you actually have like a little booklet called, and it's actually not little at all, The Miseducation of the Unrepresented Job Seeker.
Yes.
And I appreciate the title because the last solo artist I saw before the pandemic was Lauryn Hill. I saw her in late February, so I'm sure she'd appreciate the title too.
Yes. In the miseducation, that's where I got the actual word miseducation. I was like, yes, this is going to work.
Yeah, the miseducation of Lauryn Hill, and yes. And you're bringing it back almost 20 some years later. So,
that's right.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed going through this, and I guess the first question maybe for us to start out with, and as people introduce themselves into the comments, is why is this important to talk about? To talk about sort of misperceptions that underrepresented job seekers have while navigating the job search process.
So the goal is always to help people to land amazing job opportunities, but when you are underrepresented, and as we're talking about underrepresented, I mean historic populations that have been historically underrepresented or untapped in the workplace. There are so many beliefs that if we hold can create barriers for our own job search. And so one of the ways to, and me doing my part to make sure that we're removing some of those barriers, is to put out a guide. This is sort of my way of putting out some unwritten rules to really getting a great job, especially if you're running into some of these issues yourself.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people will find some really good stuff in here, regardless of who they are or what
Absolutely.
Community they come from. And when you talk about underrepresented job seekers, who are we talking about? Because I know you actually go through that in the booklet. So can you tell us a little bit about who you're talking about and why?
So one disclaimer that I always like to put out there first is that I always define diversity. diversity means different. Diversity is not because of me. It's not inherently because of me. It's because of us. It's in context to groups. And oftentimes when we begin talking about diversity, we begin losing people in the conversation because a lot of people are using diversity just to talk about as a euphemism for like Black or brown populations, for example. And so then as I get into conversations around who's underrepresented, when we at our consulting organization, Jennifer Tardy Consulting, when we're talking about historically underrepresented populations, we're speaking about women, people of color, people with disabilities, veterans, and people who identify as LGBTQIA. We take it as our as our level of accountability and really understanding those barriers that these particular populations face.
Yeah, and you go through 10 different beliefs, and I was hoping we could pull out a few of them.
Yes.
And before we get to though, I just want to give a shout out to a few more people who are introducing themselves in the stream. Ahmet from Turkey, Godfrey from Kenya, Sally from Canada, Derek from Colorado, Kelly from Pittsburgh, and then we have Karen from Arkansas, Ramel from Iowa, Elizabeth from Spain, and Joseph in New Jersey. So we have a lot of people from around the world who who are joining us for this conversation. And, to dive into some of these beliefs, number 10 that you have in here is we tend to believe that the hiring process is inherently unfair. So why is that a challenge, and what's the truth?
So I just want to update something. We tend to believe that the hiring process is inherently fair, and that becomes a challenge if we believe that it's fair. One of the things that has been so shocking to me, so I'm starting to get more into coaching career coaches. Many career coaches are giving one size fits all advice. And so if we, while we're on our job search, are believing that the hiring process is inherently fair, we believe I can bring my whole self, I can show up exactly as I am, and then I'm going to get that job if I meet those qualifications. But what can be one of the barriers that we're facing is the human aspect of the interviewers, of the employer. And when I talk about the human aspect, is that we all have biases. We all have biases, and biases show up when we are conducting interviews. And so something as simple, even if you meet all the qualifications for the job description, if you, for example, we talk sometimes about making eye contact. And I talk about that inside of this guide as well, too, that even if you meet all those basic qualifications and you're not making eye contact, I've seen a lot of people not land that job opportunity just because of that. And the interviewer is thinking that, oh, I can't trust that person. And so just making sure that you understand things that you may face by way of bias and how it may show up in the hiring process so that you can navigate it yourself.
Definitely. What I often tell job seekers is, when they face maybe a rejection or something, and they think, well, I'm a bad candidate or something like that. I always say there are so many variables that are going into this. You don't know what the person's thinking. You don't know who else they're interviewing, and all those sort of things. So I think that's such an important lesson to learn. And again, if people are wondering how to get this guide, our producers are going to be dropping the link into the comments, and obviously you could follow Jen on LinkedIn at the link below. That is going to be popping up throughout the show. And now we're not going to go through all 10 of them, but to another one that is number 8, the belief is my resume, i.e. our work history, can speak for itself. And again, why is that a challenge, and what's the truth?
And I find that I tend to have this conversation more with my clients who are women, right? And it's because one of the things that I hear quite often is that, oh, I don't want to sell myself during an interview because it feels salesy, it feels sleazy, like you know how people used to describe like car salesmen in the past, right? And so I share with them that that if you're not speaking to your past accomplishments, you're leaving room for the interviewer to fill in those gaps themselves. And so it's really important that, especially if you're a person that is in that scenario where you're feeling like, oh, this feels sleazy or it feels too salesy, then just speak to facts. So if the employer asks you about, if they say we're looking for someone who is an amazing presenter, and you're like, oh, I don't really want to speak to that. Instead, speak to facts by being able to say, hey, well, in my past, I have to deliver presentations quite often, and the evaluations are typically 9s and 10s. And so now you're still able to sell yourself, but you're saying it more factually. And that's how I kind of help people to navigate that one.
Yeah, and then the next one I think is really important because, again, in the interview process, you may hear about diversity and inclusion, and this belief here is this must be a good environment for me to work in because they are talking about the importance of diversity and inclusion. So what's the truth here?
Yes. And so there are a lot of organizations that are working to move the needle. They're working to ensure that they have more inclusive environments. And if you're looking for a place that believes in inclusion, you can't just take an employer's word for it. Look for proof of inclusion. Look at what employees are saying about their experience. Look at what job seekers are saying about their experience as well, too. Because one of the tragedies is when I began working with clients who are so fearful to start their job search because they're thinking that the next company that they go to will be just as toxic as the current environment that they're in. And they happen to take that employer's word for it going into that environment. So you have to begin looking for proof of that. And I talk a lot about how to find proof within the guide as well, too. And the guide is free. Did we say that, Andrew?
I'm not sure, but hopefully people are finding it, like I said in the comments. So, and then, when it comes to, belief number 6, and I think this is something that a lot of people trip up on, is that, I'm lucky to have gotten this interview. I'll do my best in the interview hot seat.
Yeah. This one came up, and I really wanted to put this on the list intentionally because so many people deal with interview nervousness, so many people. And I often find that we're nervous during interviews because we're looking at it as, oh, I'm lucky to have gotten this interview to begin with. And I'm going to go there and the employer is going to evaluate me. So I need to show up well so that I can be chosen. But I want anyone who feels that way to shift your mindset. You have a ton of value to offer an employer, and you need to understand and recognize that value. And so when you're bringing that value to an employer, it's not just about them picking you, you're also picking them. And in order for you to evaluate whether this employer is the right fit for you, just as they're asking you questions to assess you, you also need to ask questions to assess them. And if you if you enter interviews with those two thoughts that I have value, and this is why I made it to this interview stage, because of the value that I can bring, one, and number two, now I need to make sure that this organization aligns to my needs. And if you take that mindset, that approach, it will begin to calm your nervousness.
Yeah. And this last one that we'll go through, when I read this, I thought, it's sort of like an old school belief that I think has never actually probably translated into career advancement. And basically it is that in order to access new opportunities in my workplace, all I need to do is keep my head down and work hard. Someone will notice me.
Yes, I find this happens so often. So again, this is another reason why this one is in there as well, too. Anyone that's looking to get advanced or to advance in your organization or to get a promotion, I really want you to take more of a realistic view of or look at how promotions happen within your organization. Are people tapped for promotions, or do people at your organization get ahead because of who they know? Do people get ahead because of how much sales they bring in, versus, because sometimes we're thinking that if I produce 10 widgets the way that my job says you must produce 10 widgets a week, then naturally I'm going to get that promotion. But that's not the reality at most organizations. So I invite people, I challenge people to begin looking at who are in those most coveted positions within your organizations, and realistically, how did they get there? Because that begins to shine a light on some of the unwritten rules in your organization to advancement.
Yeah, and you actually, this is off topic, but you said one of my favorite words, widget. I know that's,
I love using that word.
yeah, exactly. It's just whatever you're producing, it's a widget.
Yes.
But yeah, no, I think that is such good advice. And like I said, I think that's what a lot of people were raised to believe, like, just keep your head down, just do your stuff and it'll be fine. But it usually rarely translates. So I think that's so important. And hopefully, like I said, people are looking in the comments, they're seeing the link, and you could then look at all the different beliefs and obviously follow Jen on LinkedIn. So, we're going to be taking your questions in just a little bit. We have a bunch coming in already, but make sure that you keep getting them in and we'll be answering them. But first, I want to say hello to some people who joined the stream. And that is Nancy from Kentucky, Jennifer and Peter in California, and Danielle from Chicago. So welcome to all of you. We're happy to have you here. And for the first question, we have a question here from Mary that says, what about age? What about age-related barriers in job searching? Do you think a lot of, the beliefs we just talked about can be applied to age? Is there anything else that you think is important to add when it comes to ageism and age discrimination?
Actually, I receive so many questions around age and ageism, age discrimination, and things like that. I may create something just around that as well, too. But yes, I would highly look at this as well, too. This is another space where we were just talking about value and understanding the value that you bring to an employer. It's more likely that you won't know for sure if you're being discriminated against by way of your age. So I would say to people, don't put as much energy in trying to figure out if you're being discriminated against. In general, put more energy in showing up as your best self and also positioning yourself with job opportunities that are connected to the level of experience that you're bringing into an organization. One of the challenges that I find with many individuals who are asking me about age discrimination is usually because, and these are some of the experiences that I've been hearing, are because you're looking at positions that may require less experience than the experience that you bring to the table, which may make some employers nervous. And so one of the things that I encourage people to do is look at positions at the level of the experience that you bring in, and look at positions at the higher level too, stretch positions, because you may find that you knock your own socks off and get some of those positions as well too. And keep in mind that positions at senior levels require more experience. And it's very likely that in order to get more experience, you are older because it takes years to gain experience. Something to think about.
Yeah, and I think the first thing you said is so important, is that so many of us carry baggage about various things, and as you get older, I think you carry that baggage of, oh, is this going to hurt me in this process, even if it's job searching or something else. And the thing is that if you have that mentality, if you have that baggage that you're holding on to, it's going to basically be telepathic to the people you're talking to, and they're going to see your insecurities. So try to own who you are, own your greatness, and let that go. And I think it'll be a lot easier for you to get past those interviews, get past those conversations. So,
and may I say something to that as well too, because I think this is a good moment to mention that, and I'm very intentional because I'm talking about subjects that affect historically underrepresented populations. I want to reiterate what I said a second ago about where you're putting your energy. If it's likely that you will not be able to tell if an employer, if bias is creeping into the process, or if you're being discriminated against, because many times it's happening outside of that interview, if it's happening, right? And so instead, place your energy in things that you know that you can control. By way of making sure that that you're understanding some of the things that you may have to navigate in the phone interview versus the video interview, and then the final interview if it happens to be on site. And so placing your energy also into how can I show up as my best self? How can I make sure that I'm fully articulating my knowledge, skills, and my experience? Place your energy there, as opposed to placing your energy in things that you can't likely control yourself.
Definitely. And actually, speaking of interviews, we have a question here from Cindy, who basically asks if you're in an interview and you feel that, the job isn't a good fit, you're not a good fit for the job, and HR and the hiring manager isn't forthcoming about the company, its culture. She wants to know, should you be straightforward in the interview to express your thought and mention that you're not a good fit? How should you work that? Or should you finish the interview, give it your all, and then afterward just say, hey, thank you for the opportunity. I don't think I want to go forward with this process.
Right. I would actually take the latter. I would continue through the rest of that interview process. And then afterward, it's acceptable for you to withdraw your name from the position. But I also want to make sure, too, that as you're talking about, this is or this isn't a good fit, that you've asked the right questions to make sure that you're clear that this company wouldn't be a good fit. And the only reason that I say that is because I run into a lot of clients who are making assumptions that this wouldn't be a good job or this, wouldn't be a good place to work. And then I'll share with them, okay, so maybe there's something that you saw in the job description, but when you get into the interview, are you asking questions just to verify that? And many times when they get into the interview and they're asking questions to verify, they find that, this is actually a good job for me. So I'll put that disclaimer out there.
Definitely, because you never know really what the job is like until you get in there and start asking questions. So I think that's really good advice. And we have a question here from Dylan. And Dylan says it's really essential to rebuild the diversity that was in place before the pandemic. Do you think the workforce will be more diverse post-pandemic? So I know there was a lot of concern when the initial sort of round of layoffs were happening at the beginning of the pandemic that they would hit marginalized and underrepresented groups much more harshly than others. So what do you think happened over the pandemic, and what do you think will happen on the other side of it?
So I love this conversation because I also work with employers to help them to increase diversity within their organization. One of the challenges that we see, especially around the pandemic, when organizations first started beginning to let people go, we did begin seeing, higher numbers of people being let go from historically underrepresented populations, more specifically from Black and Brown populations as well, too. I don't believe that post-pandemic that we're just going to see it level set by way of increasing diversity. I do believe, however, that there are many more organizations that are leaning in to doing this work, and they're really trying to figure out, how do I increase diversity within our organization? How do we maintain talented populations? How do we retain people within our organization too? So I believe that we're headed in the right direction, but immediately post-pandemic, I don't think that we're going to see the level set where organizations are now, they're like, we're here, we've met representation at our company. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that was good to see too is at the start of the pandemic, when companies were making very difficult decisions, they looked, I think a lot of them were looking at their workplaces and saying, how can we do this equitably? And to make sure that we're not undoing the work we had done. And I remember seeing a lot of conversations about that back then, but obviously, like you said, it's not going to be sort of a magic wand at the end of it. There's still a lot of work to do. And we have a question here from Suzanne, who asked about building relationships for advancement. And this is such a good question. She asked, how do you know who to trust in order to invest time? And obviously the workplace is filled with people who, you may talk to them and you're like, oh, that doesn't seem genuine or something like that. And especially now that most things are online, it may be even more difficult to tell who to trust. So what's your advice for navigating that conversation and those relationships?
One of the challenges, I love this question too, by the way. One of the challenges that we face is that we tend to look at how we select professional relationships the same way we select personal relationships. And we decide who we want to become closer to and share more information with personally by way of trust. And so as we move into the workplace, if we don't trust as many people, then we don't build as many relationships with people. I invite you to look at it a little bit differently when you're looking at professional relationships in the workplace. It's your ability to say, who do I need to have in my professional network that can support me in reaching my goals, or whatever my goals are. And so if we begin thinking about, okay, so my goal is to one day get into management. So who's in management today that's in the type of position that I'm looking to be in? And can I be intentional about saying, I would like to build a professional relationship with this person? Who do I need to be connected to in order to meet the right people in general as well too? So it's our professional relationships are more intentional, and it's more directive. It's more of with this specific relationship, what is our goal? What do we want to both get out of this relationship, and then go toward that? And the trust level with that is, can they help me to reach where I'm trying to go in this season?
That's great advice. And what's wonderful about relationships is they don't just usually happen, they take time. So even if you've invested a tiny bit of time in someone and it turns out that maybe they aren't willing to help you, or they're not going to give you the same amount of energy back, you get to figure that out over time. So it's not like you put all your eggs in one basket and you sort of lost everything. It's just sort of, you get to know someone, and then you find that out over time. So, it takes time, but eventually you'll figure it out. And then we have a question here from Ramel, who says, I am a person who stutters. How does someone with a hidden disability like stuttering navigate through an interview process? And I know that could be very difficult for people who they struggle with different things, that they may not have a disability that is visibly present, but it's something that they want to have, a welcoming environment that's comfortable for them. What is your advice for someone in that situation?
So I would actually share it in advance, right? So if I'm talking to an employer and I know that we have a phone interview coming up, one of two approaches that I would take. One is I would share in advance that, I am absolutely qualified to do this position. I do want to let you know in advance that I do often stutter as I'm interviewing, but it doesn't take away from X, Y, and Z, my knowledge, skills, and abilities. So I just wanted to give you a heads up so that there are no surprises. And then in the interview, that recruiter is more well prepared, and it's not going to become as much of a distraction to that recruiter per se. The second thing that I would also recommend as well is, what sort of interview experience would allow you to show up as your best self? Is it a written interview experience? Because a lot of people believe that that just because the recruiter is saying, hey, I'm going to call you for the phone interview, or hey, we have a video interview, that you have to absolutely take that route to be interviewed. But if you were to say, hey, is it possible that as opposed to doing a phone interview, can I do a written interview? Can you ask me questions and then I respond to it that way? And that's just an example. But the point here is saying, what sort of interview experience would you need in order for you to show up as your best self? And there's nothing wrong with at least asking. Sometimes they may say no, but sometimes they may say yes to support you or to accommodate you.
Yeah, and especially now, because I think employers had to be flexible at the beginning of the pandemic with interview options, and I think they're probably a little bit more willing to say, hey, we could give that a try. So I think that's great advice. And we have a question here. We talked obviously about older job seekers, and we have a question here from Andre, and he's asking about recent grads. What do you suggest if employers post jobs for recent grads, but then ask for 1 to 2 years of experience? And this is something that I think a lot of recent graduates run into.
Yeah, so it is so, and this is something that I'm talking with employers about as well too. Oftentimes, as a recent grad, I found that clients that I've been working with, they don't give enough credit to work that they were doing while they were in school, while they were in college. And so your ability to figure out how to share the value in the work experience that you received while you were in college, even if it wasn't an internship. Now, internship experience is good and you can stand on that. But even if it wasn't an internship experience, you're still getting the same levels of competencies. You're still building competencies. So pulling all that together, creating a narrative of your work experience there, and then seeing if that employer will recognize that as experience. Because we're all doing something, even if you have to look at organizations that you're a part of as well too, and being able to say, well, I was doing this and this and this, and here are the competencies that were built from being a part of this organization too.
Definitely. And we have somewhat of a related question here from Rebecca, who wants to know about education levels versus experience, because even though there's been a lot of progress in getting rid of saying that you need a college degree or a bachelor's degree or something like that, she says many people have decades of experience, but associate's degrees, not necessarily bachelor's degrees, or maybe no degree at all. So what is your advice for people in those situations?
Yeah, so number one, I get excited every time I hear an employer say that we're nixing the bachelor's degree. And I'm having more conversations with employers too about, is this really absolutely necessary to do this work? Because I see on the other side, as I'm working with people who are on their job search, so many people are staying in organizations far too long because they're afraid that they're not going to be as competitive. My advice to people who are in these scenarios is that pay close attention to those qualifications, because many qualifications are saying you need to have this degree or X number years of experience, and really following that closely. And then I also highly, highly promote networking. So if you know that you have the experience, but maybe you don't have the bachelor's or the master's degree, your ability to network, to get yourself in front of the right people, to talk about the package that you can offer, the value that you can offer, and then seeing if there's an exception to be able to look at that in lieu of a degree. So networking will always be key, but especially in situations like these.
Definitely. And I agree that I get excited whenever I see someone saying, we're getting rid of the degree requirements, because, they're at the bottom of the resume usually. And unless you're a doctor, and then, maybe that's important then. But I think, most of the time, experience can definitely trump a degree, and so it's always great. And to wrap up today, we have a question here from Maria that I really like, which is, how do you get past assessments? And this is something that I think a lot of job seekers run into. She says, I freeze when taking test assessments, even though I know the information. And this might be, before you even apply, they may say, hey, take this test or answer the survey, and those sort of things, and it might sort you out. Or there are some companies that actually do kind of personality test, or even more in depth, you play games and it tells you what you're good at. What's your advice for people who encounter these, and what is your suggestions?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I was just talking to a client yesterday, just because he's about to go and take an assessment as well too. Two things. One is, I want you to take some time to learn about the assessment. So, and typically if you ask the question, what type of assessment is this, or what's the name of the assessment, you can do a quick Google search on what is this assessment measuring. And so now it gives you a little more insight on, is it measuring your technical know-how? Is it measuring a personality fit? Like, what is this assessment measuring? And then once you figure out what that assessment is measuring, then ask yourself, what, for the role that you are applying to, that you're entering, what's an ideal outcome in this assessment for that role? What type of person, what type of person is this assessment actually measuring? A big part of lowering your own nervousness or your own anxiety is being able to say that I am I am exactly who needs to be in this position right here. So it's again, knowing that you can do this work and you are the ideal person for this position, and then entering the assessment with that mindset. Mindset is everything, but in order to reduce the anxiety, it's your ability to know what the assessment is measuring up front too, and how closely you know that you are there or not.
Yes, I think that's really good advice. And some assessments I think are just silly, but unfortunately, unfortunately, you might still run into them. But yeah, Jen, thank you so much for all of your information today. I know everyone got so much out of it, and people were helping each other in the comments too.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, Andrew. I do appreciate it. And good luck to everyone who's out there on their job search right now.
Definitely. And also, I hope everyone was following at the bottom of the screen, because you post such great content, and obviously they can follow you on LinkedIn.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Jen. And thank you all for joining us, as always, here on Fridays. We are here every week, so be sure to follow, because we will be back next Friday. We have Richard Orbe Austin, who is a psychologist and executive coach. We're going to be talking about imposter syndrome on May 14th at noon Eastern time. My producers will be dropping the link for the next episode into the comments, so you can RSVP to get a notification then. And obviously, we also have LinkedIn News Live here on Monday. I'll actually be talking about some job search changes over the next few months, so join us on Monday at noon Eastern time also. And as always, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for joining us. We had so many people in the stream. I still see Joseph in Jamaica, Michael from California, Maria from Argentina, Aquila from Florida, Elzer from Illinois, and we had so many people joining us in the comments and sharing their own wisdom. So thank you so much. Please stay safe. I know, obviously, there are some places around the world where COVID-19 rates are falling and things are reopening, but then there are other places like Brazil and India where things are obviously very bad and precarious right now. So please take care of yourself, follow local health guidelines, because you could only get a job, you could only be a good candidate if you're well enough to do so. So please take care of yourself. And until next time, until Friday, best of luck.